Right, just before I go any further with Marak, I thought I'd drop this video in to talk a little bit about the mods that's being used in these Let's Plays. If you don't care, skip it. Jump straight over it. There's not going to be any gameplay in this video. It is sheerly to talk about the mods. But as you play through, you might notice that I do have a rather large number of mods installed. Now the majority of these are from STEP, the Skyrim Total Enhancement Project. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is a modding guide that's designed to provide a lore-friendly, vanilla feel framework that you can then add to. I find this perfect for me, personally, because it means I don't have to remember and search for a ridiculous number of fixes, texture replacers, animations, and sounds. It also means I don't need to remember what is compatible with what, and I do take notes, obviously, just for later mods as well, but it means that STEP is fully compatible. It means I don't have to worry about a vast majority of the mods that I've installed being compatible with each other because it's already set up that way. If you're curious about STEP for yourself, I'll leave a link for it down in the description. It is incredibly useful, I've found. Now the mods that I've installed on top of this are specific to this playthrough, and I've decided not to install ones that are relevant to my other playthroughs, just to streamline it. I usually would. I usually have entirely too many mods installed at once. The majority of the mods left are the ones that I would use in every playthrough. Mods like Frostfall, Wet and Cold, Hunterborn, and CACO, the Complete Alchemy and Cooking Overhaul, that improve immersion and survival. I also usually include mods like Duel, Stealth Skills Overhaul, and one that I made, Sensible NPC Health, that they aim to improve combat to the way I like to play. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that combat should be harder. I'm not a huge fan of bludgeoning a bandit with practically no clothes, let alone armour, for minutes on end. It just doesn't feel realistic. I also don't like, on the other hand, how in vanilla you end up with trolls and other creatures which don't scale with human enemies. Now, I'd like not scaling, don't get me wrong, I like, the idea of coming across a troll at a low level and panicking and not being able to beat it. That is great, that is good. Unfortunately, bandits and other enemies in this game do scale. And once they do start scaling, bandits end up tougher than trolls, or sabercats. And frankly, no. Just don't. What do you even know? So, what I've done, instead of making the trolls scale as well, because that just adds to the scaling thing, and I'm not a huge fan, I've reduced the health of higher level bandits. They'll still do a bit more damage than the lower level bandits. They'll still be a bit more of a challenge, but they are more realistic, and most of their toughness should come from their armour. So the mod that I've used to fix this is Sensible NPC Health, which I originally made for Fallout 4. And essentially all it does in this version is lower the health of high-level bandits and other humans and make them rely far more on their armour. Armoured enemies will still be tough, while unarmoured ones will not. This should lead to bandits always being weaker than trolls, except maybe bandit chiefs in plate armour. But then that's by virtue of their armour, not their weirdly inflated health. Now this approach is designed with my approach to perks in mind as well. I've lowered the amount of damage and armour added by each perk, the initial perks in the tree, to 10% rather than 20%, which when you combine it with the increased damage and armour that you get from skill, leads to, by the time you get to full perks and 100 skill, you should get approximately double the damage and armour. It should also mean that there's a reason to use both heavy armour and alteration magic armours together, because the armour cap is harder to reach. I'm also using a mod that changes the armor cap, which is also very good. And I'll have, as part of this video, a full list of mods, which you can browse at your leisure. So yeah, I've also halved the effect of improving weapons and armor, so blade sharpening and things like that will not have as much of an effect. I've left it in, despite the fact that NPCs can't do it anyway, which really annoys me. It really annoys me. I honestly think that if you're going to put something like that in the game, you know, have the NPCs do it, you know? Don't just have an NPC drop an iron sword, have it drop a, you know, not particularly well improved iron sword. And then if you fight a higher level or richer NPC, his iron sword is, or his steel sword or whatever, is improved to a greater degree. It would just make sense. I didn't want to remove it entirely, as it did kind of make sense for a sword that was made by Yorland Greymane to be better than one by Camilla Valerius, just perhaps not by quite as much. Now, when I say made by the blacksmith, I'll get onto that later. I've also lowered the damage perks of some of the high level NPCs too, so hopefully these changes won't lead to us being obliterated at higher levels. I've mostly left Draugr alone, and I've left Briarhearts greater health and damage than their bandit counterparts because they're supernatural, so it didn't feel too weird for them to be abnormally tough or strong. I'll get on to why these changes aren't completely OP from my perspective in a little bit. For combat, I said I have duel installed, which is good because it makes combat less of a hackfest and makes blocking more important, makes stamina more important. I've got stealth skills overhaul, which makes muffle less powerful, which means I might have to use both an enchantment and the spell, especially if I'm going to quieten down iron armor, for example, or heavy armor. Beyond mods, using the console, I've massively lowered the natural health regeneration of my character. So, because it just felt unnaturally fast. You do not heal that quickly. Plus, it now gives health potions and regeneration potions a purpose outside of combat. It works a little bit more like Fallout now, where, not Fallout 4, I'm thinking more Fallout 3. Fallout 4 is a whole different kettle of fish, and I've had to change that as well. But anyway, a bit more like Fallout 3, where you didn't necessarily just automatically heal. You, if you got wounded by something, you would have to do something about that. And storing up your healing potions, or stim packs, as it is there, was important. And you couldn't just necessarily spam them in combat, because it might be more efficient to use them only when they're going to have maximum effect, because you only have so many, and you need to use them outside of combat as well. So managing how injured the character becomes is just as important between fights as it is during fights. For example, if I barely survive, it could leave me in a very difficult situation if I don't have many health potions, whereas before I'd just magically heal it like bloody Wolverine and I'd be fine. This is pretty important given that I don't intend to use healing spells either. That's an important bit there, because if I did use healing spells, then it kind of defeats the object of that, doesn't it? Because I could just use the healing spell and then regen the magicka. So I've made it a lot harder for myself in terms of health and potions and things. Initially I'm going to use potions even in combat, like you do in vanilla. Later in the game I might start deciding, I'm torn on this, I'm torn on deciding whether or not to only use potions if I manage to run away from the enemy for a bit. A little bit more realism, because grabbing a potion is not all that easy to do while you're fending off a sabercat, for example. So I may play with that, but I'm not going to use a mod for that. It's going to be a bit more of a playstyle thing. So yeah, in theory, these changes should make humanoid enemies a bit more consistent, myself a little weaker, in many respects, and combined they should lead to it being difficult, or difficult enough. I don't intend it to be a Dark Souls style adventure, but it should be hard enough, and I'd imagine I will die plenty. So if you enjoy watching me die horribly, then you will not be disappointed. I also mentioned that I have that range of survival mods installed, like Campfire and Frostfall, which are based around the need to stay warm and camping and things like that, which makes Skyrim seem just so much more real. I won't be running through any rivers with that installed, for example, because I'll freeze my ass off afterwards. And I may occasionally seem inordinately happy to find a fire and get warm. Because frankly, you run around in the cold and you suddenly come into the warm, you'll be very happy. I have complete alchemy and cooking overhaul there to fix Skyrim's horribly broken alchemy system and make it as good as it had the potential to be. That is definitely worth looking at if you haven't already. And I also have Hunterborn installed so that to skin animals and butcher them for meat and extract alchemy ingredients or poisons from them, I'll need to do it properly stage by stage. And I'll be able to, which will take time, unlike vanilla, where you just whip its skin off like a tablecloth trick. Although I believe less and less time as it gets more skilled. And I mean, fair enough, skinning might not take much time, but butchering the meat, I'd imagine, would take a reasonable amount of time to cut it off properly. I may tweak that later. I don't know. I might have butchering take time, for example, but skinning not. Things like that. I need is installed, so Marak will need to eat, sleep, etc. And his food will go stale or rotten with time, so he has to constantly can't just stuff his pockets with food and have it last forever. And finally, I get to the point I mentioned before. I have a neat little mod called Honed Metal, which means that instead of leveling my own blacksmithing or enchanting skill, I can pay one of the many smiths or mages of Skyrim to do it for me, relative to their own skill level. And costs relative to their own skill level. Now, this is a mod that I've wanted for years now, and it finally allows me to play a powerful character that isn't a master smith and an enchanter, which frankly feels a bit weird to play as if you're a Nord who might be perfectly happy to use magic, but really should not be casting it. It's going to work very well for this campaign, because unlike most orcs, or many orcs, Marak is a terrible, terrible blacksmith. He's a bit unusual for an orc. And there are, of course, many more, but I think I've covered the main changes. If you're curious about any of the others, just leave a comment. I'll let you know what it does, or what settings I'm using on it to make it do what it's doing for me. Okay, right. Back to the story.